What up, Wizards? It's Dev, SB, Mtg, we like it a magic, and I just got one question for you on this penultimate day of preview season.
Who wants to talk about murders?
I'm sorry, I have to use it more than once. Like, I'm just going to use that one time and be done with it? Absolutely not. But anyway, we've got like almost 30 more cards to talk about. If you thought preview season was just like over, not even close. Actually, fairly close. I believe tomorrow is the final day of it, but that doesn't mean we're just going to let up on cards because we're almost at the finish line. We got to get that final sprint in. So let's look at a bunch of cards from Thursday. It's Wednesday. Let's look at a bunch of cards from what day it is. Wednesday. Let's begin the day with The Chase is On. It's on what? I guess it's On the Job. That's another card we got to see today, but we'll also look at Cold Case Cracker in this slide because all these cards care about investigating, but we'll start with The Chase is On. This is... Sorry about that. This is 3 mana, 2 and a red for an instant. Target creature gets +3/+0, gains first strike till end of turn, and then you investigate. 3 mana is so much for your combat trick, but +3/+0 in first strike means that whatever you target with this with is probably going to take out whatever is blocking or blocked by it. So it's not too bad, and you get a little investigate. There's a lot of red decks in this limited that are going to care about clues because they want to sacrifice them for other effects. So I don't know, it's a neat card, but I probably wouldn't play too many of them in the old limited deck. But up next is On the Job. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 white for an insto. Creatures you control get +2/+1 till end of turn. Investigate. So this is actually kind of the going rate for an effect like this most of the time, and that's not too bad. But we got to look at Cold Case Cracker here. Jeez. A little harsh, don't you think? This is 4 mana, 3 and a blue for a 3/3 spirit detective with flying, and when it dies, you investigate. This is another worst little package in the world in limited, right? It goes in the detective deck in draft, I guess. If you're excited about that deck, here you go. It's actually coming together lately. We get some good pieces for it, but all things considered, I guess a Phantom Monster that eventually gives you a card back could be worse, but aside from that, there's really not that much more to say about this card. I guess I was glad that I got to reference Phantom Monster and make a joke that I hope nobody takes too seriously. But we got to see the last of our clue weapons today. Let's take a look at the rope and the wrench. And I guess I'll go ahead and throw in Gravestone Strider. Sure, you're a good candidate for this. You're an artifact. Why not? You're not very good. I'll throw you in this slide. But rope is just a single green mana for an artifact, which is a clue equipment. It equips for 3, and of course, since it's a clue, you can pay 2 and sack it to draw a card. But equipped creature gets +1/+2, has reach, and can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. They just threw that last little bit on there. I kind of like it. But 3 mana is a little bit too much, probably, to equip this, but like I've said about these before, I just like that they're 1 mana clues, and there's nothing wrong with that. A wrench is a single white mana for an artifact. It's also a clue equipment. You can pay 2, sag it, draw a card. It equips for 2 mana this time, an appropriate number. And the equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has vigilance and 3 tap. Tap target creature. So I guess the weird thing lore-wise that I'm kind of stuck on with this is that you can really only ever knock them out with a wrench. It can never really be the murder weapon when you think about it. But I guess there's a difference between knocking somebody out with a tap ability and just like hitting them with a wrench and killing them, which is probably what happens when you run up against them in combat with the +1/+1. I don't know. I'm overthinking this too much for a card that nobody cares about. But again, I like these like 1 mana clues that are just clues that do other stuff. And I actually think that white is a somewhat relevant color for a card like this to be in because there's multiple white decks that want 1-drop artifacts that do extra stuff, and this is one of those. That's not terrible. But Gravestone Strider over here is actually kind of neat. It's 2 mana for a 1/3 artifact creature, which is a golem. You can pay a single mana to add a mana of any color, but you only do this once each turn. It doesn't really want to be a good card that you filter your mana through all game that any deck can play. Just once a turn, bub. But you can also pay 2 and exile it from your graveyard to exile a card from a graveyard. This is actually a cool little card that's obviously designed with limited utility in mind. Again, any deck can play this thing. It's a 1/3, so it can block all the face down dudes in the early game. Relatively cheap to get on the board. Obviously fixes your mana a bit, which is okay. But even more importantly than that, in some cases, it's a card that can come out of your graveyard. There's multiple cards in this set that trigger when a card leaves your graveyard, specifically a creature card. And it can get like big expensive boogers out of your opponent's graveyard so that they can't collect evidence off of them, which is also neat. So a lot of cool stuff about this. Again, it fills some gaps in limited, and I like that. Let's keep it moving through these early cards and look at Crowd Control Warden, as well as Perimeter Enforcer and Forum Familiar. Now, Crowd Control Warden is 5 mana, 3 in Selesnya colors, a green and a white, for a 4/4 Centaur Soldier. When it enters the battlefield, or if it's turned face up, you put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the number of other creatures you control. You can disguise this for 3 and 2 green-white hybrids. So following the rule of 5 here, but once this is turned face up, sometimes it's just going to get 2, 3, 1/1 counters like on average and become like a relatively big dude. So I think if you can engineer a situation where you pay effectively 5 mana to flip it up and you get a 7/7, then you're in the money. I guess the only negative thing I have to say about this thing is that it really would have benefited a lot from even a single mid-tier keyword ability. It would just pick one. Vigilance, and I would have probably been happy with that. But otherwise, I don't really love the vanilla-ness of this thing. But I guess that's offset by the fact that you don't have to flip this up. You can just play this out of your hand, and suddenly you've only paid 5 mana for like a 7/7, and that is definitely a good rate in this limited environment. But we got to look at Perimeter Enforcer next. 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 1/1 human detective with flying and lifelink. Whenever another detective enters the battlefield under your control, and whenever a detective you control is turned face up, Perimeter Enforcer gets +1/+1 till end of turn, baby. So again, if you're excited about that detectives deck in draft, found your 2-drop, man. Honestly, if we want to build a detectives deck in standard, which I'm still not absolutely sure we want to do that, I kind of hope we can find better 2-drops than this in constructed. But if we can't, this guy might do in a pinch, but especially in limited, he's going to help you win the race some of the time. There's going to be turns where he's a 3/3 getting in, lifelink, feel good about that. And he's probably not going to win the game by himself for you, but he's probably going to go some of the way there. But you might expect Forum Familiar to be my favorite card on this slide, and you would not be disappointed. It's just a single white mana for a 1/1 cat. Best part of the card. This has Disguise 1 and a white, and when it's turned face up, you may return another target permanent you control to its owner's hand, and put a +1/+1 counter on Forum Familiar. Yeah, it better get a +1/+1 counter if I'm paying 5 total mana for this play. I do like this design though, because it ensures that when you flip it up from Disguise, it doesn't get smaller. It stays the same size theoretically, but I like that it at least does not get smaller. But if you set this for 3 mana and then get to untap with it in play, it only costs 2 mana to save one of your things. And I guess I was gonna say get a 2/2, but theoretically you already had a 2/2 realistically, but still, it's just 2 mana to save one of your things, and it's not just a creature; it's a permanent. Really like that the word permanent is printed on this card, so you can save an artifact or enchantment or even a planeswalker, and then put it back down for that enter the battlefield trigger, just to reset its loyalty if it was a walker. So there's some cool stuff about this. I don't necessarily see it in standard, but it might be a semi-important trick in limited, especially if you can reset like disguise creatures that do something when they face up. It seems like a cool trick. You have made it to the removal corner, everybody. Is where we look at some removal pieces from the day, because we got a few of them, including Murder reprint. We all kind of assumed it would be in here. We saw the art for it earlier in the set, so we kind of already knew it would be here for sure. But Murder's back. 3 mana, instant speed, destroy target creature. Perfect card. Never been a more perfect Magic card. That might actually be a true statement, but Slice from the Shadows is an only slightly more complex piece of removal. It's 2 mana, X and a black for an instant that can't be countered. This includes by the ward ability. Target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn, so it's only going to cost you 3 mana ever at instant speed to kill a face-down guy because it ignores the ward ability. That's kind of cool. But altogether, I just kind of like any spell that has this spell can't be countered printed on it. I think that's fine. I like my X spells, and even though we've seen a million spells basically exactly like this before, I always welcome it in my standard, even though probably not going to see much play there. But I always like spells like this, as a rule. We will move on here to a couple more pieces of removal. We got Makeshift Binding and Suspicious Detonation. Now, I'll look at Suspicious Detonation first, mostly because I think it's worse. I think it's the worst of the 2 cards, but it's still fine. It's 5 mana, 4 and a red for a sorcery that costs 3 less to cast if you've sacrificed an artifact this turn. This spell, too, cannot be countered, and it deals 4 damage to target creatures. So we see some removal pieces today, obviously, that are just meant to get around the ward ability, but again, I'm just always going to be a fan of this spell can't be countered. But Makeshift Binding, this is 3 mana for an enchantment, and when it ETBs, exile target creature an opponent controls until Binding leaves the battlefield. You gain 2 life. Okay, I don't hate this. Really, I don't. It's an Oblivion Ring that just forsakes the principle of netting all the permanents, and just says only creatures, which is actually massive restriction on a card like this. A 3 mana sorcery speed thing that just takes out creatures is kind of just not good. It's just not good enough, especially in modern standard Magic. But the fact that it gains you 2 life, it's almost there for me, especially in certain decks that want to gain the life for whatever reason. But obviously, I don't think it quite makes it across the finish line or anything, especially considering some of the other stuff we have in standard, right? So I don't think it's there, but I do think you'll probably draft a couple of copies of these in limited in your white deck and just play the both of them because removal is good. Now we are almost out of the commons and uncommons today, I promise, but there are a few more to talk about, including some of my favorite. But before we get to those, let's look at Leering Onlooker, Unscrupulous Agent, and Cerebral Confiscation. Now, Leering Onlooker is 2 mana, 1 and a black for a 1/3 vampire with flying. You can also pay 2 and 2 black and exile it from your graveyard to create 2 tapped 1/1 black bat creature tokens with flying. I do kind of hate that they're tapped. I honestly don't think they had to be tapped, but still, a 2 mana 1/3 flyer ain't half bad. Again, in limited, it's going to block all the dorky little guys on the ground that are face down and stuff like that, but it's also going to block a fair number of flyers in limited, especially in the early game. So it's just not like the most embarrassing card ever. And then later in the game, it gives you 2 more flyers, whether that's to help you get through or to block on the next turn or whatever you do, you know. So actually, there's a fair amount of utility to this in limited specifically. I'm not sure it's quite there, but again, a 2 mana 1/3 flyer is not the most embarrassing thing in the world. And when it gives you 2 more bodies later, I think it's probably well worth the value this one card is generating. Again, I don't think this is quite there in standard at all, but it does put a couple of bodies on the battlefield from your yard. It's not too bad. You don't ever have to actually have it on the table in the first place. Just mill it into your yard and it still does something. And that's, I don't know, man. Like, I think like Stick Fingers and other decks that want to fill their graveyard for whatever reason. Like, there's a definite possibility that this is kind of like a mid-level Narcomoeba type effect or something, but I still don't think it's quite there, but it's really pushing it for me. I'm an optimist, aren't I? What I really want in my heart of hearts, I think, is a standard where this is a card worthy of consideration, but we haven't been there in a very long time. So let's move on to Unscrupulous Agent here. We've seen this card just recently. It's 2 mana, 1 and a black for a 1/1 elf detective. And when it ETBs, target opponent exiles a card from their hand. So not Deep Cavern Bat, but actually I believe in the exact same set as Deep Cavern Bat. We got, what is it, Skullcap Snail or something like that? It's literally this card. So I don't think it's going to see too much standard play, obviously, but every now and again a slightly beefed up Burglar Rat will see play. It's got 1.5 relevant creature types on it. That might matter. You know, the snail didn't have any relevant creature types really. So I'm not like convinced this does anything, but you know, if nothing else, in limited it might be playable, but I would be careful playing 2 mana 1/1s in a format where everyone's playing a 2/2 on turn 3. Now, Cerebral Confiscation is up next. That's a great name. It's 3 mana, 2 and a black for a sorcery. Choose one of these. Target opponent discards 2 cards, or target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card. That's not bad. So you get to choose between Mind Rot and Coercion. You get to cast either one of those spells. And I actually think this card's okay. You know, again, are we talking about standard playability? Probably not. We're very likely not talking about that. But just in terms of like cards I like and think are neat, this is way up there. This is actually an interesting pick for cube, you know, because it fills 2 slots that you might have in your low powered or budget cube in the same card. If you're trying to pick between Coercion and Mind Rot, you don't have to anymore. So I kind of like that about it. Just altogether, I like the design on these. We keep seeing Mind Rot with upside, and when the upside is just cast Coercion and get the Sunfall out of their hand, like it's at least something to think about. But let's look at my 2 favorite lower rarity cards previewed so far today, at least. These definitely look like they're a cut above the rest. We got to see Make Your Move and Vengeful Tracker this morning. Now, Make Your Move is 3 mana, 2 and a white for an instant. Destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with power 4 or greater. So sort of a sideways destroy evil here that does cost you 50% more mana. That is actually kind of a lot of mana when you think about it, but the fact that we also get to blow up artifacts is potentially very important. And I believe Destroy Evil is toughness, whereas this is power, and that might matter for a couple of creatures in standard. All things considered, though, instant speed, blow up 3 different things for a pretty easy to cast cost. You know, there's no like double colors in this cost, is actually a fairly powerful and simple magic card, and I like both of those things. But Vengeful Tracker definitely has some days ahead of it. This is 2 mana, 1 and a red for a 2/2 Human Detective. Whenever an opponent sacrifices an artifact, Vengeful Tracker deals 2 damage to them. So this might not see a whole lot of play in standard, although as a sideboard piece, I could see it being a thing. You know, sometimes you see blood tokens, sometimes you see map tokens, sometimes you see clue tokens, and Often, even occasionally, you'll see treasure tokens. And that is where I think this card starts popping off pretty hard. You know, in older formats, even like Pioneer, you know, like not super old formats, treasure tokens are a big deal. And obviously in Commander, this is an effective counter to like a Dockside Extortionist. Your opponents have to get rid of this before they actually land their Dockside Extortionist. And other cards that care about treasure, there's a ton of them in Commander. Not necessarily a plague or anything, but if your opponent is playing like Smothering Tithe or something, this will help punish them, and I imagine it's something a lot of Commander players are going to be into. But don't look now, everybody. We have made it to the rares, and we're going to start with the silly build your deck around it, too expensive red sorcery of the set. This is Anzrag's Rampage, 5 mana, 3 and 2 red for a sorcery. Destroy all artifacts you don't control, then exile the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of artifacts that were put into graveyards from the battlefield this turn. You may put a creature card exiled this way onto the battlefield. It gains haste. Return it to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So obviously this wants you to crack clues and stuff in Limited and then use it, because it doesn't just care about the opponent's artifacts going to the yard. It cares about any artifacts going to the yard. So I guess the lame thing about this, by the way, in that case, is that it's a sorcery. If you could cast this instant speed after your opponent pops a bunch of clues, thinking they're going to do something awesome, then that would be great. I wonder if it started life as an instant, actually, and they designed it into a sorcery because it was powerful. I don't know. Maybe not. But either way, in Standard, I don't know how amazing this is going to be, but you do have much more of a chance to kind of build your deck around it and actually be popping artifacts. If you, I don't know, pop 5 treasures to cast this spell, you've theoretically got all your mana untapped in that situation. And you get a 5-card dig. And you can grab the Itali off the top, or it's in the top 5 or whatever, and just throw it onto the table. So again, this is a card you build your deck around, but you got to be able to play a ton of artifacts. You got to be able to send them to the graveyard somehow or another. Again, I think the best way to exploit this card is obviously treasure, but even if you can get like the God Hand and start things beautifully and ramp into this on turn 4, sacking 5 treasures to do it, then like, what, you can still whiff. It's just, that's going to feel terrible. Even if you get the perfect start, you can still just boof out pretty hard. So I'm not too convinced about it, but it does seem like a fun kind of card to build around. And that's all I really ask for most of the time anyway. But up next, we have an insult of a card. This is Hidden in Plain Sight, 4 mana, 3 and a green for a sorcery. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. Cloak 2 of those cards and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. That's all the text on the card that's not reminder text. This is supposed to be Collected Company. It's less Coco and more no-no. We'll call it Broco. It's really not. It's not very good. Okay, so 4 mana to get like 4 power on 2 guys. Like, I don't know. I'm trying to justify the existence of it. And like, maybe the point here is that even when Collected Company is awful, it's still halfway decent. But there's a sorcery, which is just, Collected Company was an instant, you know, which is like the whole thing with the card. If Collected Company was a sorcery, I don't think it would see like hardly any play, but this is a sorcery, and you still have to pay full price if you want to like flip the creatures up. It's just terrible looking when you know that a card like Coco exists. So it's really hard to evaluate in a vacuum, but I'm pretty sure that like, even if they had never printed Collected Company, this would still end up a Bolt Green rare. I don't know, man. I want to believe, but I just kind of can't. Just seems atrocious to me, man. Maybe I'm bagging on it too much. Maybe it's better than I think, but I don't think so, definitionally. So let's just go ahead and move on. Why not? Let's cut our losses and take a look here at the next card. What is it? It's Audience with Tristani. Arguably the better looking green card. I think we could probably debate over that though, but Audience with Tristani is 3 mana, 2 and a green for a sorcery. Sorceries are killing me, man. Create a 0/1 green plant creature token, then draw cards equal to the number of differently named creature tokens that you control. See, again, the sorceries, man, like if this instant speed, it would have been sick. It's just like make a blocker real quick and draw like 2 or 3 cards. Like, oh my goodness, yes, let's do that. But as it stands, it's not great. I do like that it's a card draw spell that puts a body on the table, which is actually okay. You know, we're starting to get there. You know, you can cast this on your turn 3 after like a Teachings of the Kieran or something, draw 2 cards and put a body on the table. And again, all these things kind of aren't horrible, but I think that whatever your opponent's doing is probably a better start to the game 9 times out of 10. You could make it work, but I'm, again, not too sure that it's worth doing so. That said, this is one of the first cards today that I'm like really interested in trying to make work for real. Let's take, I believe, a pretty steep step up in terms of quality here and take a look at Reenact the Crime. Really interesting design on this one, y'all. This is 4 total mana, 1 and 3 blue for an instant. Exile target non-land card in a graveyard that was put there from anywhere this turn. Copy it. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. This gets to be an instant, though, right? This is actually kind of sick. Now, you can use it on your own stuff. If there's a thing in your graveyard, whether it's a creature that died in combat or a spell you cast earlier in the turn, you can target your own stuff with this. And that's probably how people are going to do it like a lot of the time. But I also just like the idea in any control deck of like countering the Atraxa, countering the Atali, and then EOT, boom. I guess I have my own copy of Atraxa now. I guess I have my own Atali. Oh, you tried to cast Breach the Multiverse or whatever, the 7 mana black spell is called that like people use to win the game. You know, oh, I counter that, but I guess I'll have one now. You know, it's like, I imagine that's going to actually happen a good bit. 4 mana is less than you think for a play like this. So I think it's a neat card. I don't know that it's going to be like a finisher of choice, or if it's maybe a little too tricksy, or if, you know, it's too expensive to get out of its own way or anything like that. But there sure are a lot of cards in Standard right now that people pay like 6-7 mana for at the top of the curve, all the way at the top of the curve, baby, to just, you know, basically say, do I get to get up from the table now? Do I get to go home and make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Because that's what I'd like to do. And in fact, blue mages now, because, you know, they didn't already have all the tricks, they get to be like, actually, no, you don't get that Atraxa, but I do. And I get to go home. I get to get up from the table and make a PB&J because that's what I'd like to do too. So I just, again, blue mages, I don't know how you guys ever complain about anything. This is a pretty tricksy little trick that I'm going to be thinking about for the next few weeks here, I think. But World Soul's Rage is up next. This is a green, a red, and X for a sorcery that deals X damage to any old target. Put up to X land cards from your hand and or graveyard onto the battlefield. Tapped. That's a good card, man. You know, I've said this already in this video, but multiple times in spoiler season. I like my X spells, and I especially like my X damage to any target spells. Just simple, clean, Hikari Utada, beautiful stuff. I like it. I like X, deal X damage to a thing, especially any target. I like being able to hit the dome, you know, hit the head, the body will fall. It's actually terrible advice. 9 times out of 10, you should target the creatures if you can, but still, I like X spells that go to anywhere. So actually a huge fan of this, and it's a ramp spell too. So you're telling me this is kind of a removal spell that's way off rate if you do use it as a removal spell. You know, if you're taking out a 3 toughness dude with this, it costs you 5 mana. It's sorcery speed to do that. So that's actually not good. But the fact that it can ramp you 2 or 3 at the same time, that is good. You know, if I'm taking out, say, a 2-drop with this, and I'm also bringing back 2 like fetch lands or stuff, and lands that I milled away earlier in the game, then suddenly I'm paying 4 mana to basically cast Invasion of Zendikar or Explosive Vegetation or whatever you want to call it, while also affecting my opponent's side of the board. And that is a dumb play. And by the way, that's not all the card does. If you make that play, I think it's kind of good enough a lot of the time, but this card is also massively scalable to where if you draw it in the late game in your ramp deck, which it looks like you're playing one if you're playing this card, then suddenly you draw it off the top on like turn 12 or whatever, you just win the game with the card like this. So that's true of most X spells that hit the dome, but I just feel like I have to point that out because not only can this be a decent mid-game piece of removal that puts a land on the table, which is fine in and of itself, but it can also just end the game late, and cards like that tend to be pretty decent. But let's have a look-see at Illicit Masquerade here. 4 mana, 3 and a black for an enchantment with flash. When it ETBs, put a counterfeit counter on each creature you control. Whenever a creature you control with a counterfeit counter on it dies, exile it and return up to 1 other target creature from your graveyard onto the battlefield, baby. That's a sick little card right here, man. Oh my god. Can I talk to you about it for just a second? Now, I have to admit, first of all, there is a pessimistic part of me here that's like, this is just Lich Knight's Conquest with extra steps, you know, but actually I think it's way better than that. It does cost a mana less. So just kind of being Zombify, if you can get a creature off the table the turn that you play it, is almost good enough. But this is Zombify multiple times, you know, like if you're able to, and this is actually kind of a harder ask than you might think, but if you're able to set up both your board state and your graveyard in just the right way, then suddenly you feel pretty untouchable. You know, your opponent can't kill any of your creatures, or you're going to bring back like 2 or even 3 like much bigger or harder to deal with dudes. This also means that they can't just like sweep the table, at least with like non-exile stuff, right? So they try to sweep the table, then suddenly again, you Ben Kenobi them. If they strike you down, you will become more powerful. So actually kind of a disgusting card if you can get the correct pieces in place by the time it enters play. But let's move on to Improbable Explosion. This is 4 mana, 2, a blue, and a red for a sorcery. Draw 2 cards. Then you may discard 2 cards. When you do, Improbable Explosion deals X damage to each creature where X is the highest mana value among the discarded cards. We have a decent Izzet sweeper. I just feel like we never really get those. You know what I mean? But this one's cool. You know, I wish it were instant speed, but it would just be much, much better if it were. You know, probably this would be not broken, but very, very good at instant speed. So at sorcery speed, you have the option for this to be a terrible divination. You know, 4 mana, that's more than divination. You know, 4 mana sorcery speed, draw 2 and do nothing else, is a mode that this card has. I want to make you aware of. But aside from that, you can just loot with this, which means that you can throw Reanimator style pieces and stuff in your yard, or just stuff to disturb later or flashback or whatever. I like that there's a graveyard fueling kind of mode on this. While also, you know, again, drawing you more cards, which is always like the best thing you can do in a game of Magic. And then just blowing up the whole table, you know, like even if you just throw like a 3 or 4 drop in the yard, which is easier said than done, and sometimes you'd much rather have that 3 or 4 drop in your hand than in your yard. These are things I want to at least acknowledge. But, you know, like if you do throw your Reanimator target into your yard, like an Atraxa or a Tally or whatever you're doing, I don't care. That's 7, you know what I mean? That's 7. So if you discard any of those, like you're definitely blowing up the entire table on curve. And again, you got deeper into your deck, you fueled your Reanimator deck, just everybody's having a good time except your opponent in that case. So I really think this is one to watch out for, is all I'm saying. Now we have reached the final card of the day together, everybody. Give yourselves a hand, because this one is quite, and I don't want to use offensive language here on the channel, but this card is in fact a doozy. This is Niv Mizzet, Guild Pact. This is 5 mana, 1 of each color. We call that Wooburg. This is Wooburg for a 6/6 legendary dragon avatar with flying and hexproof from multicolored. It's carrying over that ability to this iteration. Whenever Niv Mizzet Guild Pact deals combat damage to a player, it deals X damage to any target. Target player draws X cards and you gain X life, where X is the number of different color pairs among permanents you control that are exactly 2 colors. Now look, to be honest with you, I'm pretty sure that both Improbable Explosion and the card before that, Illicit Masquerade, they're probably better cards than Niv Mizzet. But that said, I just really like Niv Mizzet and I respect him, and he's always my favorite card of the day whenever he pops up. He's a cool dude. If this were an enter the battlefield trigger, I think we'd be talking a little bit more. You know, you just have to have like 2 things with color pairs out in order for it to be like kind of busted. You know, 2 to any target, draw 2, gain 2 life. Like that would be amazing on ETB, but for some reason they made this combat damage trigger, so it's probably not like actually standard playable. And I'm sorry, I know you're smarter than me, Niv Mizzet. You're smarter than everybody, but look, I got to make this call. I don't think it's going to happen. I'm sorry, but I still think, all that considered, that you are the coolest and smartest and nicest and most handsome card of the entire day. That is all we got for cards from today. I believe there is one more full day of Murders at Karlov Manor spoilers if you want to check those out. Thanks for the spoiler season so far. It's not quite over, and once it is, we got to do top 10 sleepers, top 25 cards in the set, start doing deck techs, review the entire set, and assign a grade to every single card on Twitch. That's always really fun. There's a lot left to do with this set. We're really only starting to dig into it right now as we get access to most of the cards in it. We're building decks, we're having fun, we're finding synergies. It's a good time. So spoiler season is still kind of far from over. And again, even once it's over, we get to do all the good stuff then. So make sure you're subbed to the channel if you haven't done it yet, because there's a lot to talk about remaining with this set. And of course, like the video on your way out, and make sure to go to the comments section. Let me know what your favorite cards from the day were, because there were a few bangers today. And I guess I'm more or less donezo for this one. So just do all the YouTube stuff on your way out. Check out the Patreon, $1 a month to vote on content around here, and really just $1 a month to support the channel like immensely. You know, if everybody that watched the videos gave $1 a month, we would be the best channel on YouTube. Not even the best Magic channel, just the best channel on YouTube. We'd be doing crazy stuff if everybody put a buck in. But look, even if you can't, I just appreciate you being here. Watch time matters too, but honestly, I'm just like that we're buds. You know what I mean? So just go down there in the comment section one more time and let me know how you felt about all the goings on and how you like this set. I honestly like it more than I think a lot of you guys do, but we can disagree on that and still kick it. You know what I mean? We're friends. But I guess I'm donezo. Have I already used that one? Which one have I not used? That is Itsky Lewitsky, as well as Allsky Kowalski. I'm Deb from The Place, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.